the president's naivete with regards to Russia and his faulty judgment about Russia's intentions and objectives has led to a number of foreign policy challenges that we face. And unfortunately, not having anticipated Russia's intentions, the president wasn't able to shape the kinds of events that may have been able to prevent the kinds of circumstances that you're seeing in the Ukraine, as well as the things that you're seeing in Syria. We really need to understand that Russia has very different interests than ours. This is not fantasy land. This is reality, where they are a geopolitical adversary. They're not our enemy, but they are certainly an adversary on the world stage.
It is time to enter the arena. Some will see what Mitt Romney said this week about Barack Obama to be little more than sour grapes. Just another shot at the man who beat him for the presidency and now taking backhanded slaps. However, we need to look at his comments a bit closer and then compare it to not only reaction from Republicans, but from Democrats and independents who would seem to be coming to a consensus that this president is failing on so many levels. It's becoming difficult to keep track of all the various transgressions. Welcome back to Mid Point. The Director of Health Policy at the Independent Women's Forum, Hadley Heath Manning, and former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton and veteran Democratic strategist David Goodfriend. We thank both of you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and start out with what Mr. Romney said earlier this week, and I'm going to read this for you because this is what he told the Washington Times on Tuesday. That has everybody talking. Quote, "I was not a big fan of the president's policies, as you know, either domestically or internationally, but the results of his mistakes and errors, in my opinion, have been more severe than even I would have predicted." All right, let's go to the Democratic side of things. First of all, David, I'll leave this to you. You have to admit that there has been a good reason for Mitt Romney to say this, and to a lot of people, this does not sound like sour grapes. It sounds like reality.
Well, it's beyond dispute that the president's approval ratings are low. It's beyond dispute that many Democrats have been critical of the president. But I would take issue with what you just said. This is sour grapes at its most laughable. I mean, to have the loser of the last presidential election sitting in his private equity funded mansion throwing pot shots from his armchair is ridiculous, and it makes him look awful, in my opinion. When you see somebody, a president, for example, struggling, as I think we did in previous administrations, both Republican and Democrat, the political maneuvering has to be a little more deft. You have to be pro-United States, pro-America, and you can be critical of the president, but I think the loser of the prior campaign has to be very, very careful. And I think I would actually point to George H.W. Bush during the Clinton administration. He had his differences with the president, yet he was a gentleman about it, and nobody ever really criticized him for the way he spoke about foreign policy or domestic policy. Mitt Romney looks ridiculous in saying that he's even more disappointed with the current president. Mitt Romney, you haven't had a good idea your entire life.
All right, Hadley Heath Manning, I'm going to throw it to you, Hadley, on this, because I think David just laid down a whole lot of gauntlets here, and certainly I can see myself chomping at the bit a few times here, because I will just say, frankly, it doesn't make a difference, losers, winners. A lot of politicians talk about politicians over and over again, and we always hear from them whether they win or lose. I'll just add that. Hadley, I'll throw it to you next.
Well, these comments were part of a stumping speech that Mitt Romney was making on behalf of some Republican candidates in West Virginia. So let's not forget that this isn't just about Mitt Romney and President Obama. This is about the midterm elections this fall. So clearly Romney's trying to paint the picture that the president has failed on the economy, that he's failed in foreign policy. And, I think we can agree that the approval ratings speak for themselves on foreign policy, especially president facing a 35% approval rating. So these numbers spell trouble not just for the president. Of course, there won't be another presidential election for 2 years, which is the reason why we're starting to see people like Hillary Clinton and other Democrats criticize President Obama from the left, criticize President Obama for pragmatic reasons, differences within the Democratic Party. So the last 2 years of his presidency will be very difficult for him in terms of approval, because he will begin to get criticism from the left. Now, from the right, we're seeing people like Mitt Romney, especially right now because of the midterm elections. That's the elephant in the room.
David, are you saying, and let me just again, I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm just going to go ahead and try and put it out here. Are you saying, though, that the president has not made a lot of mistakes and doesn't deserve a tremendous amount of criticism that he's getting? Because I want to face it now, even the left is giving him a lot of criticism for things that he has done, and people are running from a lot of policies like Obamacare, so it's not like Mitt Romney's the only one.
I'm not saying that at all. I pointed out right up front that even Democrats have been critical of the president lately. I am saying that Mitt Romney may be the wrong messenger for the Republican Party to choose to put out there. I mean, listen, the president has been criticized by Democrats in his own party for not doing enough, not being progressive enough. He's been criticized by conservatives for doing too much. I actually think that every president, and right now I'm thinking about Harry Truman, whose approval ratings rarely peaked above 40%. Every president comes under tremendous fire, particularly at the end of their terms. And history takes a while sometimes for history. Now, I think in this case, history will show an unemployment rate that peaked at 10%, that's now down to 6.5%. It will show health reform that actually has become more and more effective at signing up people, not the doomsday scenarios that we've seen. That's why we don't hear it discussed nearly as much in Washington these days. I do think that the president could do a much better job, and I'm saying this as a former Clinton man, okay? I came out of the Clinton White House. I think the president could do a much better job of communicating with the American people and explaining to them what's going on in the world. The world seems to be coming apart at the hinges right now, and we need a president to stand up and give some sense of direction. This is where the country is going. This is how it impacts you. This is where I think we ought to be. We don't get enough of that. I would say that even here on Newsmax. I would criticize the president for that. But Mitt Romney, that's a little bit too much like a sore loser. I think that Republicans could find a better spokesperson for that viewpoint.
Hadley, let's go from there then. The Republicans finding a better spokesperson. Let's just say then, for giggles and grins, we're talking about it here, that Mitt Romney was off base. It was nothing more than sour grapes. Aren't there other Republicans who have taken the president to task, who simply put, you would then say, are not losers of a presidential election, but certainly have a lot of wherewithal to make those comments?
Oh, certainly. I think across the board on the right and the center right, among the libertarian community and among conservatives, and even among some liberals and progressives, as David said, the president's receiving criticism from all sides. And I would say the reason we're not discussing Obamacare as much right now isn't because people are happy with it, but because there are crises all around the world that demand our attention. I still believe Obamacare will be a major issue and a painful one for Democrats this fall. But when it comes to messengers, maybe I have to agree with David here that Mitt Romney may not be the best messenger for conservatism at this point. But the question is, and I say this as a conservative, who is the best messenger? We have, an interesting field shaping up for 2016, and a lot of the people who will enter the presidential race for the next term have different ideas to offer, have different personalities and different messages, different ways to attract voters. But it's a very wide open field at this point, and I think people on the right in this country who find themselves disagreeing with the president also lack a leader, lack that sort of emblematic spokesperson. We often talk about Ronald Reagan and how we wish that we had some kind of Reagan-esque leader on the right, but so far that person is yet to be seen, is yet to rise above. So it'll be interesting to see the presidential race in 2016, but as of yet, I don't know who that messenger is on the right.
I have 2 minutes left, and I'm going to do a little spin here, throw both of you a curveball here on something entirely different, because I do want to get this issue we talked about, and you talked about, certainly, David, the president needing to tell the people of America where he is going. I want to turn to the press conference that he had yesterday regarding what has happened with ISIS and the beheading of an American journalist here. Hadley, this is to you first. Optics here, and that's the great new password that we have in American politics these days, now comes into play. The president makes this statement, then rushes to go play a golf game. That simply cannot sit well with a lot of people who want their president sitting down, sitting in the Oval Office, and dealing with problems instead of playing games.
No, you're right. I have to agree with you. I think part of the optics here is that the president has done more fundraising events than any president before him, and he seems to be out of touch, especially when such serious events are taking place overseas. When he says that ISIS has no place in the 21st century, I don't believe even his words are not strong enough. Of course, most Americans, I believe, would prefer to see action over words, but even the president's words, you can't just say that this is evil and has no place in the 21st century. This type of evil has no place at all in this world, and so I think it's important that we stand up as Americans, and maybe it is a time to unite and to come together and to put party lines aside. But when we see one of our own murdered so brutally by a group of people who really have their sights set on destroying our way of life and destroying our country, that deserves more than just words, and more than words that sound weak at worst.
David, I got about 25 seconds left. Your take on the optics.
I used to be very critical of President George W. Bush for holding a press conference and then saying, "Now watch this drive," as he hit a golf ball. But President Obama has taken that away from me. I can no longer make that criticism. I think it's a facet of the presidency that they have a daily life to lead. Sometimes that includes vacation. George W. Bush certainly spent a lot of time in Crawford, and I was critical of him for it. But here we see a president from my party taking a vacation too. Look, as to the crisis in the Middle East with ISIS, I think that the bombing campaign has been effective. I think that we were able to protect civilians on that mountain. We were able to retake that dam in Iraq. There is progress. I do think the president, in particular the Secretary of State, John Kerry, have shown a strong, concerted, action-oriented way of responding to that absolutely illegal and unhumanitarian organization.
All right, we got you guys to agree on something. We've set a historical precedent here on Mid Point. We're going to make sure that we do it again somewhere down the line, but I know there's going to be discourse no matter what we do. It is a pleasure seeing both of you again. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Later on this hour, the ridiculous madness that is the inability